There were two verses that caught my attention this week as I was reading through the readings. The final verse of both of them, and you can read whatever you like into this fact. Here they are. Genesis 2:25, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. And Luke 8:35, and they went out to see what was done, and came to Jesus, and found the man out of whom the devils were departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Naked and unashamed, clothed and afraid. Naked and unashamed first. When I was an undergraduate at university, an email was sent to me from the university proctors, and it read, "We are concerned about the cases of plagiarism that we have identified and refer you to the rules governing the theft and falsification of work." It was one of those heart-stopping moments where you thought, have they discovered my little soiree onto Wikipedia in the depths of night when I hadn't quite managed to put an essay together? I asked my neighbour, "Have you received an email?" "No," he said. My neighbour on the other side, "No," she said, "I haven't either." What should I do? I thought, should I go and confess to my tutors? Need I email the proctors back directly? It turned out, they promised it wasn't a witch hunt, that the proctors had sent this email to a random sample of students to remind them of the importance of avoiding plagiarism. It got them into a good bit of trouble. The proctors, that is, not the students, many of whom did indeed go to their deans of welfare and confess this being the end of their lives. It reminds me of a story. And for full disclosure, I should say that this is by James Payne in the Canons' Ward, Volume 3, 1884, the ISBN number on request. He writes, "There is a story told, no doubt by the enemy of the church, called The Six Curates of Connaughton. These divines were shady as to character and by no means spotless as to conduct. But the bishop had a difficulty in getting rid of them, can you imagine? At last he hit upon a device. He sent each of them an anonymous letter with these words of warning: 'All is discovered, flee!' And the next day the diocese was clear of the whole half dozen." We're afraid of our defences being stripped away. We fear to bare ourselves and our souls. We shrink back in shyness, or we step forward under the cover of humour or intelligence or looks or good manners, but being naked and unashamed. For some of us, it might quite literally be bodily nakedness of which we're fearful. It's not that there's anything wrong with our bodies, it's not that we're fearing hypothermia, but it's what we think others might think, how we might be judged. And my goodness, do we live in a time when bodies are judged like never before. For others of us, it's about exposure of our behaviour or our thoughts. And again, it's rarely the behaviour or the thoughts themselves, because we're often content in doing them and thinking them as long as nobody sees. But it's the bearing of them before others. It's the revealing of that which we intended to keep secret. How many of us have had thoughts like this? He won't accept me if he knows this about me. She won't forgive me if she knows that about me. Nobody could love this part of me. Who would respect that part of me? And this is most profoundly damaging when we start thinking these things of God. God won't accept me if he knows this about me. God won't forgive me if she knows that about me. God couldn't love this part of me. God wouldn't respect that part of me. So we cover up our bodies and our souls, we hide from one another, and we hide from God. But it should not be like that for the Christian. Have you ever been with a person with whom you felt completely comfortable, absolutely at ease? As if you could say anything at all, no matter what it was, and they would welcome and accept it. That's how we should feel in our relationship to God. The Apostle Paul speaks of Christians having clothed themselves with Christ, rather than hiding behind whatever barriers we put up, or going out under the guise of something else. Instead, the Christian is clothed in Christ. We have nothing to be ashamed of when our lives display Christ. Not our life, but his death and his resurrection. Not our shame, but his glory. And that is precisely what plays out in the second reading, in the gospel reading. The man who is possessed and naked becomes healed and clothed with Christ. The way that Gerard explains this story is he says that this man is the archetypical scapegoat. He's an outcast from his community, a member of a group chosen by his whole town, driven out and bound in chains. Though he bursts those initial bonds that hold him, he continues to run naked among the tombs, hurting himself. He has internalized the narrative of his community. He believes, as they do, that he is bad and that he deserves the exile and the mistreatment that he receives. And as long as he stays away, then the rest of the community lives at peace. This is a story that we hear told again and again. A scapegoat so that the rest of the community can experience peace. A story reflected in Jesus' own life. And as is so common, the man becomes the person that he's told he's meant to be, taking out the pain that he experiences from his banishment on himself. And in the gospel account, Jesus arrives to this town and he disrupts this unconscious pact between the demoniac and his community. Rather than buying into the narrative and leaving him alone, as the demoniac requests, rather, Jesus exorcises his demons, calling this poor soul into relationship with him. He begins the process of providing a new identity, one rooted in relationship with Christ. And when the townspeople see what Jesus has done, they're afraid. And there hinges the whole story. They should be relieved or surprised or overjoyed to see that this man is now peaceful and civilized, returned to them and their community in his right mind. But instead, they tell Jesus to leave. Because as long as there's that demoniac exiled out there that they can label as bad, then they're safely in the opposite category, able to call themselves good. But that formerly possessed man is now clothed and in his right mind, and his transformation upsets the system that the townspeople have created to define their own self-worth. They've made him naked and ashamed so that they can call themselves clothed and unashamed. And they've, in so doing, perverted that image of purity from creation, clothed and unashamed, so that they can feel good about themselves, like they've got one up on their neighbour. And this same phenomenon is by no means absent in our society. You only have to read the front pages of the tabloids to find out which person or which group of people have been exiled and stripped naked and exposed as evil, so that the rest of us might define ourselves as good. Just this last week, Bournemouth Council installed metal bars on its benches to prevent homeless people from sleeping on them. Exiled, stripped naked, exposed as evil, so the rest of us might define ourselves as good. As Christians, we're called to live differently, to clothe ourselves in Christ and to live without shame. That means we don't need to force others into the gutter so that we can feel that we're standing just a little bit taller. Our worth is not based on how much better we are than our vilified neighbour. Our worth is based on our relationship with the living God. We've nothing to fear in the prospering of others, and nothing to be ashamed of in the exposing of our own lives and selves. Amen.